survivors, and welcome to Shatner Mask, a Halloween podcast by Resident Evil fans for Resident Evil fans. This is First Aid Spray bonus episode 24, and in this edition we'll be stalking through the night as we celebrate the spookiest time of year with Film Club Halloween. I'm your host, Cy, and joining me in Haddonfield this week, Kill, Death, Blood, it's Kelsey, aka KDB.
That was a really, like you said, low effort one, but I really like it because it's seasonal.
That's alright, it gets worse. Stab, stab, stab! It's Firebutt Steve Adams.
Stab! Hi, everybody.
I don't know. The subject of this bonus episode, like all others, was voted on by our Patreon backers. Support the show now to not only keep us afloat, but also to create new content. Select what that content is and hear it a month before everyone else. Tiers begin at just $1 a month. Check out patreon.com/FA Spray Pod for the full breakdown. A long time coming, this one. This was on a poll sometime in 2022, and we missed the window, unfortunately, for Halloween. So we decided to back pocket it for the meantime and wait until the next appropriate moment. So yes, here we are. The slasher film poll, Halloween, is the winner. So special thank you on this episode goes to Taurus Tarkus on YouTube for their cover of the classic John Carpenter Halloween theme. Of course, we couldn't do an episode without, that theme in here somewhere. So listen for that on this podcast as we break down the 1978 original movie and the 2018 movie of the same name as well. So, let's start with the 1978 launch right in Halloween, which came about as a pitch from the independent filmmaker Irwin Yablans and his financer Mustafa Akkad, who had seen Assault on Precinct 13 and wanted to work with John Carpenter on a film about a babysitter killing serial murderer. Apparently the script was always titled Halloween, but Carpenter, who took the gig for $10,000, had most of the creative control with the writing, directing and the scoring. Donald Pleasance, who plays Sam Loomis, was reportedly paid double what Carpenter took, but the film had a budget of around $300,000, not much at all, which famously led to some of its more simple elements, such as Michael Myers' William Shatner Mask. It debuted in Kansas City on October 24th, 1978 and went on to make $47 million in the US, a total of $70 million worldwide, spawning 5 sequels, a semi-reboot sort of thing in the 90s, another reboot in the 2000s, another semi-reboot thing in the 2010s. It has a Metacritic score of 96%. So let's talk about our early experiences with the Halloween franchise and with the original movie. Because it's quite an old flick now, over 40 years ago, I don't know if it will be necessarily the first one that everyone saw. Kelsey, what do you remember your earliest memories of Halloween? Not the time of year, the franchise.
Oh yes, trick-or-treating with my brother. For me, along with Chucky, Alien, Predator, Freddy Krueger, like Michael Myers has just always been there with me at that younger age where he shouldn't have been. And I specifically remember who is now my oldest friend, his name is Ryan, I'll give him a shout out. He introduced me to Halloween probably when I was about 7 years old, and he's younger than me, so he was watching it before I was. And yeah, I remember him bringing a video round, and it was one of those things that we would watch like every other week. It was just like an after school thing, and he had some figurines of Michael Myers and stuff. So along with all those other horror iconic characters, it was just something that I always knew of and maybe shouldn't have been watching it, but I think I kind of turned out okay. I don't think it did me too much damage. So it's always been there. And I think with the franchise, I've generally seen every movie at least once, I think. But the most repeat watches are the original, maybe the original 2. Halloween H2O, funnily enough, I rented that multiple times, which is the one with Busta Rhymes, I think. So yeah, although obviously I didn't see it when it came out, it's been there since, the early 90s for me. Saw it when I was very young. And yeah, it's always kind of just been... There's stuff from this film that we'll talk about that's just always been seared into my brain, a lot of the imagery and stuff. So yeah, he's always been around as Michael.
He's like that, he is. Steve, any thoughts on your early experiences with Halloween? How far back do you go with it?
So my history with the Halloween franchise is a bit spotty, a bit weird. I mean, my origin point is watching a VHS of Halloween 4. So driving that far into the lore at that point as a young age kind of a bit adrift. All I saw was, scary man in white mask, kid kills someone at the end, and raving lunatic old man with a gun. So, I was a little bit too young for it, much like Kels. And then my second experience is I want to say it's Resurrections. It's the one where, spoilers for Halloween Resurrections, Laurie Strode dies very early.
Yes, that's Resurrections.
Which I believe is a sequel to one of the many reboots this series has had.
That is a sequel to H2O, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So for this podcast, our two subject topics of Halloween 78 and the reboot or sequel boot, I don't know what you want to call it, the re-sequel, they're two fresh things for me. I've always known of Michael Myers. I've not had any hate for the man or anything. It's just slasher films are some of these things that I have to really, really be in the mood for.
Yeah.
I'm much more of a fan of your shuffling corpse horror movie with the Dawn of the Deads and the like, more so than slasher films.
I'm glad we did it in this order because I've got even less exposure to it. Never seen a single one of them in my life.
It's impressive.
I didn't have I didn't have that trademark friend that you've mentioned, Kelsey, that a lot of people have. Someone in their life necessarily who would be like, watch this horror film. Not particularly, anyway. None of my friends or anyone really that I knew was that bothered about most of it, so I didn't have the entry point that way, and I picked up on the stuff that I was interested in as I went along. And I've said before that my dad was like, you like monsters, watch zombie films, but he doesn't really have any particular interest in horror as well that I'm aware of. So I was vaguely aware of it because of H2O, which came out in 1998, and just because it's part of our cultural fabric, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Michael Myers and Freddy and Jason and all of these characters and Ghostface. But that's the thing, I haven't seen a Scream, I haven't seen an Elm Street, I haven't seen a Friday, and I haven't seen a Halloween. None of them ever.
Wow.
I've seen Freddy vs. Jason.
Oh, well, I mean, we're starting from the top, really, aren't we, there?
It's all downhill.
Which is incredibly weird. But of course, I know about all these characters' histories, and having watched the original Halloween, I did some digging as well and read a lot of the plot synopsis and sort of the stuff that the franchise is very odd history and very odd canon and timeline and stuff like that. So, I know plenty about it, but I had no particular interest in any of these. And they all sort of melded together. The only memory I really have of any of them is that I did know one guy who was absolutely terrified by the theme music. I'm not even completely sure he'd ever seen the film, but the music terrified him. Yeah. We used to turn the lights off in the house and play it really loud and just to listen to him squeal, which is incredibly cruel. But he also used to do it to the X-Files theme as well, which is just weird memory of those two themes smushing together. But there you go. That is to say, yes, fresh experiences for both of these films for me. So Let's get into Halloween 76 in that case, which begins on Halloween 1963, where a young Michael Myers kills his sister with a butcher's knife after she's essentially ignored him from her babysitting duties to have sex with her boyfriend. 15 years later, psychiatrist Dr. Samuel Loomis heads to Smith's Grove Sanitarium to pick Michael up for a court hearing. To find that he's actually already escaped, he steals Loomis's car. He later steals some overalls, and he heads into Haddonfield, his hometown, to start a killing spree. That's essentially the plot of the film. I don't think it gets overly more complex than that, but what we're going to do first is, of course, break down the story. So, I guess starting with the opening, because I think the opening's, for me, actually, one of the best parts of the film. Kelsey, how do you feel about the way that Halloween begins to unfold?
So, the opening is definitely one of the things that, for the longest time, was seared into my mind, as I mentioned, and it was the thing that really unsettled me. And you got to remember, when I watched this, it was on a VHS. It was on a worn VHS as well. And this is going to sound utterly ridiculous, and I don't want to undermine everything I'm going to say after this. But my friend at the time convinced me that when Michael is walking through the house, and we have this incredible sort of one-er that opens the film. It's his point of view.
Yeah.
And when he walks through the house and picks up what is in fact a clown mask and puts it on his face, my friend told me that was a condom that he puts on his head. And for years, that's what I thought it was. So, and I don't know why, but there's something that's kind of more terrifying about that than what he actually does put on his head. And it wasn't maybe until I saw a DVD years later that I realised that that's not what it was. But anyway, as an opening... I think the opening's awesome. As I said, I'm going to talk about this more later, but it's It's got so many of those things that we know John Carpenter for right there in the first few minutes. It sets the scene. It uses like a couple of little music cues that, you know, send chills down your spine and stuff like that. And yeah, the opening's really strong for me. And so this will be one of the very few times in the entire franchise, actually, you see his face as well, because you do see young Michael Myers at the end as he's getting apprehended by the police. But it's really weird and creepy, and you could argue that maybe does the film ever reach this kind of height of creepiness as it goes on? I think it maybe does, but yeah, it's an awesome opening. It's iconic, and it's one of the things that I remember the most about the movie.
Yeah, obviously, not having seen it before, I didn't know what to expect, but I actually really liked the opening, as you say, like a big, long shot, and a really interesting way to introduce the character directly from the point of view. And then the moment where it sort of switches and you see him standing there with a knife and he's like a small child. I mean, you know, knowing the franchise, you kind of figured that that's the way it was going, but like, it's a really cool reveal, to be honest. I can absolutely understand like the point of view of people who are watching that for the first time when it first came out in particular as well. Like, what an incredible hook to start a film. Steve, how do you feel about the opening of Halloween?
Yeah, so I tried to approach at least this film with as much generosity as I can do, because it's like obviously a film from the late 70s, and it is generally regarded as a trend setter. I know it wasn't the first slasher film, technically that was something like Psycho, but it's the one that kind of made them more blockbustery,
yeah,
you know, that kind of thing. And so I was trying to be as generous as possible, and I still actually was very impressed, because like I wasn't expecting the opening kill, if you like, to be a POV walkthrough, and then for it to be revealed that, you know, it's a young child who, at least I think that, I don't know if it's intentional, but the child looks as bewildered about it as anybody else.
Yep.
Yeah.
At least initially. We all know that goes into a very different route later on. But yeah, I thought it was, you know, for a 70s thing, like really creepy, atmospheric, and tense. And then just like, the only thing that probably would knock it down a little bit is perhaps, you know, Judith's performance as she's dying. But, you know, it's that era. But yeah, to say that kind of trope's done a lot in like slasher films, particularly where there is a murder or someone gets butchered, for it to be first-person POV. I mean, it's something that doesn't happen very often in games either, but like... I want to say the rail shooter Dead Space Extraction is a similar thing where you play as a character, go through a first-person thing. It turns out you've murdered a load of people. It's a cool trope when they do it, and the fact that it started here impressed me. Yeah, so aside from a little bit of wonky acting, pretty creepy.
Yeah, the acting thing is obviously something that probably come up again, but like, I think you say of the era, but also I think just the budget.
Yeah,
as well.
100%.
Yeah, exactly.
Obviously, you know, they only get what they had available to them. So I can absolutely agree with you on that point. But again, I was in the same sort of mindset of like, I have to be a little bit sort of try and put myself in the shoes of someone watching it for the first time in the 70s. You know, this had never been done before and that kind of thing. So yes, strong start. Let's see if it keeps up. How do we feel about the pacing? Because it's actually, I've definitely got a lot of different mixed opinions about the film. I will just lay that out there now. But I actually really enjoyed the pacing of this film, because after that first kill, it really makes you wait. And I actually quite enjoyed that. Kelsey, how did you feel about the pacing of Halloween?
So I think so essentially this film is like a really slow chase scene, and it's like a chase from a couple of different angles. And I think the pacing is good. I think this film consistently, for lots of reasons, keeps up that level of dread, and the pacing is a big part of that. This, you know, it's a film about being hunted, and the pace at which someone is being hunted is something you could talk about, because you basically have this dog chasing a cat chasing a mouse type scenario where so you've got the doctor chasing Michael chasing innocent woman who resembles the killer's sister. So that's kind of what frames the whole thing. And in terms of how it's paced, it's classic Carpenter. It's very slow. There's multiple long one shots, you know, slow camera moves and stuff like that. And it never really goes kind of above what I'd describe maybe as like 7 or 8. It doesn't turn into a frantic pace, and I'm happy with it. It's not a long film, so
yeah, sure.
Yeah, so I have no complaints about the pacing, and I think I'll talk more about some story bits in a minute, but I haven't watched this film probably for about 10 years, but I have seen it multiple times, and I actually watched it this past Sunday again for the first time, like I say, in about 10 years, and I was surprised at how quick it flew by, but yet it is all constantly like very slow, and I really like that because I think there's literally a scene where at one point Michael Myers has stood outside someone's house for like 8 minutes and you think, come on, when's something going to happen here? But it never felt boring and dull, because you're kind of like on the edge of your seat, like, what is this maniac going to do? And, there's reasons for that, and I'll talk about more in a minute. But yeah, I think it's really well paced. This is the stuff that Carpenter was doing, and now loads of people have just emulated and tried to emulate. It's really good pacing for a film that actually doesn't have a lot happening in it, I would say.
Yeah, you mentioned, I didn't know, Steve, you mentioned Psycho. Somebody said Psycho anyway. And, this film definitely drew comparisons to that for one reason or another.
Yep.
But that's, that's it for me. I'm not interested in necessarily the blockbuster direction that we go from the slasher fic. But I love Psychos. That's a horror film that I can get behind. I'm super old school, and I just love the classics, clearly, but I really liked that pacing element to it. We get time to establish the characters and watch Jamie Lee Curtis act circles around everyone else, which is, again, budget. And just lots of little weird bits, like they're going past one of the kids' dad, who's a cop, by the way, and just like trying to just gives you a bit more feeling of what the town is and the size of the town and how connected it is and that kind of stuff, and seeing the doctor kind of like then also show up to talk to the cop. It's a really nice connection to everything. And meanwhile, Michael's driving around in the background, which is really fun.
Yeah.
Stuff like that I really like. Just that stuff makes me think of Psycho. Not when we're actually in sort of, the real, into the night so much, but the setup felt like Psycho, because it's a lot of like, okay, I know something's going to happen at one point. We just have to get there. But yeah, I was going to watch. I watched these a couple of weeks ago, so my memory might be a little bit spotty on some of them. I was going to do one night and one the other, and I just did them back to back because both of these films are quite short, which also appreciated about it. Steve, what do you feel about the pacing and the setup for the film?
Pretty much the same as everybody else. I was very impressed with how much it's got a steady air of dread and stuff. I'm used to slasher films being more teenagers who done it, trying to figure out who's killing who. So it was nice that this is more of almost like a disaster film where you're watching something about to happen.
They don't know what they're in for, kind of thing.
Yeah. We all know who the killer is. So now let's see as they try and stop him or as they operate. And I would argue some of the slice of life stuff's a bit dull, but it's meant to set the scene and ground the world a bit, isn't it? Do I care about the other characters other than Strode? Loomis and Myers? No. But they have to be there to kind of fill out the world. Otherwise, Haddonfield's going to be a very small place with nothing in it. Generally speaking, I feel like the first half of the movie, the most engaging parts are probably the somewhat creepy and overbearing Dr. Loomis trying to exude just how much of a danger Michael Myers is. Because at this point, he stabbed his sister, but he's disappeared. And he's just standing around looking a bit goofy. He may or may not have killed a worker in a field somewhere and nicked his boiler suit. It just feels like they're both as bad as each other. I know they're not, but watching that cat and mouse chase escalate while Laurie Strode is basically going, I've got to babysit tonight. Who's that weirdo? It's an air of dread as opposed to the usual, like, oh no, Jeffrey's been killed. How did he do it? Who did it? And that was refreshing for me.
Yes, for sure. It's really interesting watching that character because you get an insight into... When you think about it from everyone else's sort of point of view, it's like, he's just like some crazed madman. It's like, that's okay. That would never happen here. Sort of, there's the sort of response he gets from people, which is really cool. It's a nice consideration.
It's not the traditional Hippocratic Oath, but I'll allow it. Walking around with a handgun trying to stop his patient.
Yes. Okay, let's start tearing into the story proper. Then I'm just going to let people pick apart moments they like and didn't like. Overall, Steve, how did you feel about Halloween 76's I don't even know if you'd really call... Is it... Story just feels like the wrong word. Plotting, I guess.
Almost
I
nothing
still
happens.
think slasher.
Yes, when murder do be.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just see it internally as a slasher disaster film. Like, Laurie's irrelevant. This is more, can
Right.
these people survive this
I wouldn't say that.
unnatural event? Well, you see, that's the thing. We'll get into it when we get to Halloween 2018, all right? Okay? But I think I appreciate it when there is less lore and less reason to this madness, and it's just about the characters surviving or trying to survive. The quote-unquote fighting between Laurie surviving Myers is more compelling than like hearing about this, that, and the other, and this cult or whatever. And yeah, definitely feel like as a story, man shows up, tries to kill girl, gets his eye stabbed with a flipping coat hanger, gets shot, disappears. Way more interesting than just like, oh yeah, so this, and this. He killed his daughter, or he killed his sister, or no. The lore isn't compelling for me.
Right.
The events itself that unfold are very entertaining to watch. The way he spooks off at the end is really creepy, though.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting, because everyone has sort of a different interpretation of it. Obviously, we're not get too deep into it, but the series did head down a direction, from what I understand, of like trying to build a background history, and it kind of got convoluted, hence all the different reboots and stuff. But yeah, in this film, he really is just Madman goes back to hometown, and what I like about it is that there's a lot of him picking his moment, which adds back to what we were saying about the pace. Like, there's a lot of him, it feels like, waiting for his chance to sneak in, kill someone, and then get out. There is something going up upstairs for me, for Michael Myers, because it feels like he knows that he needs to be careful, not for his safety, but because it ruins the chance of him getting to kill more people and just carry on. Like, he's not interested in necessarily a broad end goal for this, but like, yeah. I like that he's not just running around the streets with a machete, screaming.
Oh, of course not. No, what I mean is it's like the shark in Jaws, right?
Totally.
The shark doesn't just go around and annihilate everyone on the beach. They pick their moment, they strike.
Yes.
It's dramatic and it's fun. Like, that kind of stuff's cool. I mean, I don't want to go diverge onto other slasher films, okay? But like, compared to stuff like Freddy and Jason, which are all theatrical and stupid, I did prefer this take of a slasher killer. It's a lot more intimidating.
Yes, I mean, it's a lot more grounded. I know it's not, but it's grounded in reality compared to the others, at least. Like, it realistically could happen, and also, it's just that genuine creepiness that you can feel if you go to take your bin out or something, and it's just pitch black. Someone could be behind that bush. You don't know, and that's literally the kind of stuff that this film plays on. The first kill that adult Michael makes, I don't know how long into the film it is. It feels quite a way in, but it's such a payoff when you wait for it that entire time, and then someone gets in a car and then gets strangled. And I don't think the kill is particularly... I expected this film to be more gratuitous. Of course it's not, because it's 40 years old, but it's got such a legacy that I was probably expecting more than it was going to deliver. But I still felt that it was an identifiable moment of the film, because you've waited for it. So it certainly feels like, right, now things are really going to begin. Kelsey, how did you feel about the general story of Halloween and the plottings?
Yeah, it's an hour into the film, that kill. You're completely right.
There you go.
Yeah.
2/3 of the way through, essentially.
Yeah, so I mean, I do agree with a lot of what you're both saying, and it's completely spot on. However, I think even when ignoring everything that came after this movie, it's doing stuff that sets it apart from other slasher movies, and I'll talk more about it when we get to Michael as well. But it's the story of the boogeyman, and it's a story about being hunted, and the story is slightly more supernatural than the movie ever really looks or feels on the surface, because you've both mentioned it's so grounded, it's so realistic and stuff like that, and it generally shows itself to be that standard psycho slasher movie. You said Psycho, so this is a huge influence on this movie, but Carpenter is taking things to the next level without kind of showing you what he's doing with the characters. He's playing with some much darker themes, and I talked about the sort of chase of the plot, which is what we're watching unfold. But this film, watching the story happen, it's it's weird. Like, there's almost no exposition, which I absolutely love. The closest we get to exposition is Loomis's little dialogue, sort of little monologue things that he has where he's talking about Michael, and he always delivers it in this kind of menacing way. So that's more interesting than, your bog standard exposition. But the story is this steady build to make you wonder a couple of things. It's like, okay, what's the fate of the main character and the characters that you're watching, I suppose, or you could think about Laurie, but even Laurie's friend is taking up a big load of screen time. She's that first death. But also, what's Michael up to? And this story relies heavily on the threat and presence of this demonic character to keep you on the edge of your seat, rather than trying to explain what's happening to you. And you don't really have your hand held, and it can almost make it seem sometimes kind of pointless. You also said, oh, he's just a madman going back to his hometown, and it's like, there's more to it than that. And I think the movie,
right, that's fair.
The movie is doing things to make you ask, why is this happening? Because you also said he is thinking about it. He's picking his moments, and he's not. There's one point where a kid just runs into him, and he doesn't just slaughter the kid on the spot. He's methodical. There's reasons, and what is these reasons? The film very explicitly talks about fate at one point as well in the classroom, and I think most of what stands out about the story is Michael, and that's what I'll dive into in a minute. And it's, what does he represent? Why is he doing this? And I think that's the allure of this film more than anything. It's very symbol driven, it's very character driven, and it continues right up to the point that Steve referenced right at the very end, where he disappears, and it's another how moment. Like, has he survived? How has he done this? Because the film goes out of its way. Loomis says it as well. He says it's the boogeyman. It's Michael. I'm kind of, again, maybe laying my cards out a bit too early, but he's more than just a psychotic human. There's darker forces at play, and the film doesn't rub it into your face, but the hallmarks are all there. And I love the way this story plays out, because it's very much watching that dread unfold and making you ask, hang on, why is he doing this? Like, why is he killing her? Why is he doing this? And there is a reason. Don't quite know what they are. but yeah. So that's my story ramble.
You've actually brought me to a great point then, because I wanted to talk about, the stuff sort of late into the film. I feel like we've shot through this, but like, that being said, I'm going to start picking it apart a little bit here, because I've got certainly mixed feelings about that, because you're right, I framed it that way because that's what it feels like at the beginning, but by the end you've got all these unanswered questions. And there are things about it that I do like, and there are things about it that I don't like. It sort of loses me towards the end because of the supernatural element, and it just kind of, it does come out, it feels like it comes out of nowhere. There's not a lot of explanation to it. You just kind of like, it kind of just feels like it ends on, just go with it. It's because it's scary. And I was like, I don't know. It just feels a bit just lazy, almost, to be quite honest. It's like, here's another reason to be scared. He's getting back up and running away, I guess. I like the ritualistic nature of Myers, certainly. Like, we just talked about him being methodical is a great word. And thinking about stuff. And there is clearly stuff going on there, because close to the end of the film, Laurie discovers one of the bodies on a bed with the headstone of Judith, Michael's sister, sitting there. So that is an incredibly striking and strange moment where you're like, okay, so he's been up to something else. There's something, what is he trying to do? Recreate that night in some fashion? He's obsessed with it. There's something going on there. And to be fair, there's symbolism there that does kind of invite the idea of Satanism, which I possibly intentional, I'm sure. But there's just not enough of an explanation or a connection to me to understand, is he human or is he something else? And I kind of like him better as just human. I kind of would have liked him just to have, if you're going to shoot him, then he just dies. But like, obviously that's not the direction it goes. For me personally, it just sorts of shake apart a little bit at the end, and loses a little bit of what makes it scary for me personally. Steve, how did you feel about the apparent supernaturalness of Myers?
See, this lent me going down a bit of a rabbit hole, as in I looked in, like, I haven't watched all of the other films, but I've been kind of looking into the various bits and pieces of the lore and whatnot, and I have to be honest, I preferred it when I didn't know what the answer was, or the theoretical answer was, and like the the horror of the unknown. Like, is it demonic possession? Is it something even more sinister? Is it just he's just one durable prick? Like, as opposed to it's an evil cult who did these worshipping things and evil child possession and mind control. The lore of the original continuity of Halloween films. I'll say it plainly, okay. And I appreciate you may be a fan of these.
No. Let me just.
It's glow in the dark horse.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
Disclaimer,
just cut the rope. The law stops at maybe Halloween 1 or 2. Yeah. Like, I can appreciate the idea and logic behind, spoilers for Halloween 2, that Laurie is, at least in that continuity, here also a relative, a sister.
Yeah. Right. I don't even like that, to be honest. Yeah.
But and that's only as a slasher trope. Yeah. I much more prefer it when he is just some kind of evil force or a durable git. Whether the answer is or isn't, that's okay. I'm fine with, like, it could be a demon possessing him or not. It could be Cthulhu just manipulating him for all I care, but it is compelling to see the shark at work, to answer your question in a short way. So.
No, I mean, to be fair, in that sort of vein, I don't know if I want an answer. The answer you just gave me, I don't want that, certainly. But maybe I think what I would have liked more of is just a bit more, if you're going to go that route, just a little bit more of it and a little bit earlier on as well. Just maybe I just need to rewatch it. Maybe the signs are there. There should be some implication that kind of thing is coming. It just feels suddenly convenient that he gets to survive a bunch of stuff and run off to me. But what do I know? I've only seen it once, so maybe if I want to rewatch, maybe I'll pick up on what you were saying, Kelsey, about the fate stuff and like that. A bit more of a creepier atmosphere from it.
So they literally watch The Thing on the TV, and it shows it like 5 times. Yeah. There's like a UFO and aliens and stuff. This all means something. I'm not saying he's been possessed by aliens, but you're right. It's Carpenter. Carpenter making you ask. Like I'm saying, like Steve.
I suppose you're right. Except the problem is that now, having watched that after watching The Thing, I was just entertained by the
thing.
Fact that they were watching The Thing. I wasn't thinking about it too deeply, of course, as well, because this is 4 years before The Thing came out. So obviously that is The Thing from Another World, not John Carpenter's one. But it's really funny to see his passion for that project in that. What a weird connection that I didn't know existed between the two franchises until now. It's really cute, that is. Any more thoughts on the story? Maybe the kills? Anything, Kelsey, that you want to add before we move on to the characters?
The kills are all very subtle, and I do want to point out. You mentioned the one in the car. I mean, it verges the poor woman. It does verge a little bit on comedy because of the way her eyes roll and stuff. But that's an acting thing, which we've kind of touched on, which almost spoils the moment. But I like that this movie, and when we talk about the second movie in a little while, I'll kind of say why. But I like this movie that it does a lot more for me without showing brutal detail, which it doesn't really show. There's a little bit, right. And the kills are not the thing to watch this movie for. No. And almost the complete opposite can be said for the future movie and other franchises, because they do different things. The kills are, they're a minor part of this movie. It's more about character and Michael and the lore around Michael, as we keep saying. And as a disclaimer, I don't even really like the second one that much, the original one. I love this original movie, but all that stuff that comes after, I think he gets his head cut off at one point and comes back. It's just all like, that's not really my bag. So I'm with Steve there, where he's like, what did you call it, Steve? Glow in the dark shit.
It's just sometimes lore is not needed. Like, this is like Gun Survivor 2 Dream Notes being canon. It's irrelevant. You don't need it. It's fine.
Carpenter, for me, it's I'll say it a couple of times. Like, he is an artist. This is his way of. He's making a movie to make people go to the cinema and terrify them, but he's got thoughts. He's got reasons for doing stuff, and this is just his way of doing it. And
No, that's completely fair. Steve, any more thoughts on the story and the murders, if you like?
I like how this again is establishing a lot of tropes and stuff. Because as much as I don't like slasher films, I've been on the periphery of many an evening in college watching stuff like it. For example, this is going to sound awful, but promiscuous friend getting killed by the ghost I don't know. I can't remember her name. Sorry. And then obviously the boyfriend literally getting pinned up by the kitchen knife, which gets referenced again in the new film. You can see like the establishments of what would become later a bit too cartoony in the likes of like Jason with his machete and Freddy with his dream traps. Whereas it's just rather like strangle person again, stab person. I appreciate the subtlety, for want of a better term. And the actual quote unquote final showdowns with Michael and Laurie, I actually kind of appreciate a lot. Like normally in these things, they are just screaming in fear. And yes, by the end, she's left a bit distressed. Like very distressed. But until that final moment, she's actually quote unquote kind of badass. Like hiding in the cupboard, sure, but she grabs a like coat hanger, turns it into a blade and jabs him straight in the eye. She unmasks him to try and confuse him. Like, plucky stuff. I genuinely enjoyed the conflict.
Yes, actually, I've also just been scanning through it, because I say it's been a couple of weeks looking through, but you're absolutely right on that point. Like she gets to do the distressed stuff because she's like banging on the door and all that, but she gets to be pretty badass as well. She saves the kids, and she stabs Michael. What quite interesting, I thought, watching it with, and maybe this is just me overthinking it, a coat hanger and a knitting needle. Objects that you might necessarily associate with traditional feminine women. Knitting and clothes and all that stuff. Yep. It was a really interesting touch that I was like, okay, cool. But yeah, the final showdown stuff is really cool, and it feels nice and claustrophobic and stuff like that. And also, my favourite kill isn't even on screen, just because I was watching it being like, right, he's stolen the car, he's heading back to the town. Is he just going to show up in overalls? No, they actually show that, he stole overalls off a dude.
Yeah, off a mechanic.
I was like, I was like, okay, cool. Works for me. He wanted to ditch his, hospital gown or whatever. I was like, okay, cool. It was a nice little moment. And again, you don't see the kill. You kind of see the devastation of what's left, and we pan over and see the body and the weeds or whatever. The doctor doesn't see. All right, overall. Okay, let's talk about characters then. Kelsey, let's start with you. I think we've already established there is only really 3 characters that are perhaps worth talking about, but I'll pass the ball to you.
Yeah, definitely. I think, as I've sort of touched on, the movie just constantly puts things in front of you that should be making you kind of question what Michael is, and the hints are all over the place. I mentioned the thing on the TV, but the dog barking at him. At one point, Loomis says he is not a man, and it's like, oh, this is just the ravings of a dramatic doctor. And it's like, no, he's saying it for a reason. And whether he knows it or not, is up for debate. But music on the radio, when they're driving the car, it's playing Don't Fear the Reaper, which is a fun little thing. And I just think, and there's actually one point in the film where it pretty heavily implies that he can teleport. Now, it's like, is this where he stood between the washing and it sort of cuts back to her and then he's gone? And it's like, is she imagining it? Is it just, oh no, he ran away really quickly? Because he obviously didn't run away. So is it implanting imagery in her head? So there's stuff going on here. And I think, if you were struggling, the film does hardline it at the very end, as I said, when Loomis literally says it was the boogeyman. And some of the subsequent films, as we said, cross the line a little bit more and really step up that stuff, which I don't necessarily enjoy. I think this one does keep its feet on the ground enough for the most part, where you can constantly still argue, oh no, he is just a psychopathic human. But for me, I think the intention of Carpenter, okay, I mean, he's not going to outright say it, but for me, there's more going on under the surface for the character. And I think it does really well not to jump the shark for Michael Myers in this film. It definitely did it in later films. We're not talking about them. This film, I think it's really strong. I think he's depicted as a monster you could genuinely kind of run into in the real world. And, and I'm asking the questions while I'm watching, is he possessed by demonic forces? Is he evil incarnate? He's literally known as the Shape, so it's like, is he a shapeshifter? This is like more akin to something like Stephen King's It, and this came before it as well. So Michael is kind of, it's Carpenter's way of materializing our fear of being hunted or judged or fate coming for us in this horrifying form. And I think there's no question that his presence in the film is superb. And we can talk about tropes and stuff, but this film was kind of planting its flag long before they were tropes. And yeah, I think it just does it so well with him. He clearly has an awareness, like you said, Si, and in some cases seems to have those internal morals. So he's not just slaughtering people left and right. He has a purpose, and he's thinking about what he's doing. Who's controlling him or what's controlling him, I think, is what makes him interesting. And it does make it fun. You know, you said it, you would kind of prefer if he was just a normal kind of crazy bloke. But for me, it's like, yeah, I mean, it's a movie though, and I'm kind of having a bit more fun with
I
it.
get
And
you.
you have to meet it where it's at. And for me, I think you can talk about, as I said, jumping the shark, which other films do. I don't think this one does. I think it asks really interesting questions, and I don't think the character's ever been better than he was in this movie. I'll talk about the others in a minute. I'll just pass it over to you guys. But that's what I think about Michael.
Clearly, my interpretation of Loomis, I was just going to say, was the roving lunatic, because I was not putting any stock in the things that you were just saying that he says. Absolutely, you're right.
Yeah.
Clearly, I should have been, because there is implication, there is sort of foreshadowing and more to it that I didn't take in, because I just thought, well, he's just terrified of this guy.
That's how clever the film is.
Yeah, maybe so. Steve, go ahead.
I'll say, just as a question, I know this is a lot of taste preferences here, but what's scarier? Michael Myers being a man or a monster under the mask?
Well, in real life, I suppose a man. But like I say, it's...
Well, I know, but like...
It's, I don't know.
I mean,
it's a movie, and I mean, I think, like I say, it doesn't quite jump the shark. I say monster, but it's like, what is that monster? What is it? It's difficult to kind of get my words around. But for me, it's the uncertainty is terrifying. You think, okay, what's more scary in your house, a ghost or an intruder? It's like, well, an intruder, definitely. But, you know, like, if you don't know one way or the other, it's kind of more scary, I suppose.
I think that's kind of the point I was veering towards. I love the fact that we don't get an answer to it. You know, I prefer it that we don't, in a way. I also, apparently Loomis's monologue about how he talks to like young Michael and says that there's nothing, you know, they're just evil in those eyes, is something to do with, apparently John Carpenter actually went during like his college days. Like he apparently met with psychiatric patients, and a young child inspired that entire monologue for Loomis. That's terrifying. The fact that he's met people that inspired, but basically his character of Loomis is his reaction to another patient in a psychiatric institution. I think generally speaking, my favourite character in this film is probably still Laurie, because they are likeable and do generally, despite the we've mentioned the tropes and stuff, not following traditional trends. I feel like. You know, and you know, I would again argue being justifiably distressed at the fact that all that's gone on right at the end of the film. Loomis is probably, I understand his necessity, and I love Donald Pleasance as a person. You know, in some of like Blofeld, for example, in the Bond films, but he feels like he's a little bit too on the nose and a bit too dramatic. And this is compared to a film with Michael Bloody Myers in it, you know. Whereas that stuff, where like Kelsa said, like where it's just being weird and stalking, that's probably some of the better moments, being all creepy as a character. To compartmentalize, if I had to rank the three characters in this film, unfortunately, it is literally Laurie, Michael, Loomis. Yeah,
that's fair. I'm in the same boat. As I say, he was a bit of his own raving madman to me. But I don't disagree with that. It's interesting about Laurie, because like, not to date this episode too hard, but having just had a conversation yesterday about Castlevania Nocturne, which just released, I've been reliably informed by Steve that there are people upset about the character of Maria in that, because she's capable and she's not screaming and she gets things done and all this stuff. And it's like, look, we've been doing that for 40 years. Like, why are we complaining about this one character? Because, yeah, you're right. Like, Laurie bucks a bunch of, at the time, movie trends. It's a really interesting spot to sit, because it's almost like, and I don't necessarily believe this, but I can understand why people would take, there's a message in this film that she's the single one who's doing a good job with the kids while everyone else is farting around having fun, and they all get murdered and she survives. Is it trying to tell you that, you know, trad wife is the way to go? I don't know. But she is the most interesting character. She's the most capable character. She makes the right decisions. And also...
Proto Ripley.
Yeah, yeah. And it's cool as well that we get enough time to see her interacting with her friends and see how she fits into that group of three as the sort of, the one that has it together a bit more. The bit, maybe you could describe her if you were friends with her. She's a bit boring, really, but like she winds up obviously not being boring because she fights off a potential demon man. So yeah, it's cool to have that friends group established more. Some acting notwithstanding, it just works for the small cast of characters. Like they actually make use of everyone quite well, I'd say. Kelsey, I'm going to kick it back to you for characters because you said you had a little bit more before we move on.
Yeah, like you're both completely right about Laurie, and she's there in a large way to represent the audience as well, and just some of the many young people that would have been watching this movie. That's her positioning in the film, and Carpenter wants to terrify those people, and so we see her babysitting and talking about going to the dance with a boy, but then also doing things maybe she shouldn't. She's smoking and stuff like that, but she's sort of living the life of like a normal person, and then the movie is saying like we see you young whippersnappers and what you get up to, but pay attention to Laurie because she's the one. She's not getting distracted, meaning maybe she has a better chance of getting away. So basically, don't have sex with anyone because you'd be too distracted from knife-wielding demons. And that's like her position. And she's great. I think the legacy of the character benefits a lot from movies that came afterwards, but she is really strong in this film and iconic. And so she does grow in the franchise, but here, she's the light of kind of normal living, and if you come into contact with this evil presence, is this how you should, how you might react? It's how the normal person's dealing with it. And Jamie Lee Curtis is probably the best actor in this film, so yeah, she's awesome performance. So I absolutely love her. And then Donald Pleasance, I just think he's so good from the very first moment. He is being weird, and he is being like, you've been around too many crazy people, mate. And I think like he's not even incredibly adept at his job. He seems like constantly a step behind Michael as well, which makes him come off like a little aloof, and maybe makes you question his ramblings about Michael. Like, is he crazy too, or is he being dramatic? He doesn't always constantly seem to have like a full grasp, and he gets snuck up on by the sheriff as well, and which is quite funny. And it's like, is this effect of Michael stronger than we realize? Is it rubbing off on Loomis? And I'm going to say yes, probably. And I just think as an actor as well, he performs it incredibly well. I think he's there to plant those seeds to the audience, like I said, that something's going on, and at the same time through his performance kind of make you brush him off. So his dialogue is kind of like some of it's like it's right out of the Twilight Zone or like an old novel or something, but I very much enjoy the character. And I think all three, this is, I mentioned earlier, the story of the movie is kind of driven by Michael and the questions around Michael. It's Michael, Loomis and Laurie. They're the three interesting things of this film, and I think as a trio, stellar. I love all of them.
Yeah, it's interesting that you're talking about the this sort of laying the groundwork for that trope, the horny teenagers get murdered thing that's been in every slasher film, from here until eternity after this. It's parodied bit, hundreds of times as well. But like, I really like it here compared to some other films where it is weirdly almost perverse, like murder porn sort of stuff. Whereas this, it's not gratuitous in any fashion. No. It is, as you say, a bit more realistic. They're teenagers, they're smoking, they're having sex. This is how it goes. It's just unfortunate for them that their town happens to be, also the town of a crazy murderer, demon man. So it's way more interesting, and I don't think some of the nastier stuff that's come since. And I'm not going to say one way or the other about anything in particular, because again, I don't necessarily know, because I haven't really seen any of it, but I know plenty about it. The stuff that just seems to get his rocks off a little bit on that. This one is not that at all. Yeah. Like this is way more, almost I would go as far as to say like well intentioned, that kind of thing. But let's get into the rest of it, really. The direction, the atmosphere. We obviously talked a fair bit about that already, but the music, all the stuff about the way this film looks and sounds. Steve, how did you feel about all of that stuff?
Oh Jesus, the music of Halloween, terrible, mate. No, phenomenal. I love the little touches they use to try and, obviously, if you're not paying attention to the film, you bloody should be moments. And the main theme, my God, for such a quote unquote simple melody, I couldn't play it, but also it's unnerving in the best possible way. And not to throw shade at other slasher films, but a good theme can go a long way. I remember that Jason's got the cha-cha-cha, but that's it. This stuff, it's terrifying.
Yeah.
Genuinely, I think it's what I feel. I've probably been a bit critical of the film so far, or at least I personally feel like I have been. The music, it carries it all the way to I can watch this film again. Yeah, I mean, it's Carpenter though. He's got built-in cheat codes, hasn't he? He can just do this stuff. The Thing, Escape from New York. The man knows how to handle a synthesizer, and my God, it helps this film's atmosphere.
Yeah, just you talking about it, I can hear it in my head, immediately. Not just the piano part, but all the synth stuff that's just so Carpenter.
It's like 5/4, isn't it? It's a lot faster than.
I believe so. Yeah, so it's obviously a bit of an off-kilter rhythm as it goes, and what an iconic sound that sort of lower melody. Couldn't be anyone else except Carpenter. So yeah, the music's obviously great. From the way that it looks, actually, even though it's been a couple of weeks, I can still picture this film in my head. It has a very specific style. When we get into the murderings part of the movie, where it's nighttime, there's a lot of those sort of long shots in particular that are very dark and moody. And I think that even despite its low budget or whatever, I feel like lighting in this film is actually quite a highlight, because you see what you need in order to follow what's going on, but it's still dark and often not quite monochromatic, but it's black and the dark blue of night. There's not a lot of colour in there once we get into the sort of later stages. So
see, I feel like in my regard this time, seeing the visuals, particularly the film, I'm spoilt by more newer films and older films, and so it kind of I was just sat there going, yeah, this is acceptably fine for the era. I'm not saying it was monolith, but now you mention the dark blues, particularly at night and stuff. Oh my God, there is actually a chilling atmosphere. A leitmotif is music, Steve, but that visually, mise en scene.
Yeah, there you go.
Media studies. So now you mentioned the light composition stuff, especially at night, is great. The flatness of day, obviously they're recording in actual daylight, aren't they? I don't think a lot of it is on stage because of the budget.
No, I think it was all shot on location. There's some parts where you can tell that they're very clearly blowing a leaf blower around, which I actually quite enjoyed. But yeah, it's all shot on scene. There's also one part where Laurie's walking around the streets where suddenly it has rained essentially between shots. You could believe that she's gone around the block a few times and it chucked her down and then suddenly stopped. But the pavement's suddenly wet, and it's just one of those little filmmaking things. It's just funny. I always appreciate seeing that because as someone who has just messed around with making films and college stuff, it's just the way it
happens,
is. And it just made me think of that, and made me a little bit warm and fuzzy inside. Kelsey, how did you feel about the way the film looks, the way the film sounds?
So I think if I was a teenager when this movie came out, obviously at the time we had a few big time directors and Spielberg was one of them. And I feel like I would have thought that John Carpenter was the cooler, more interesting one, because Spielberg was doing a lot of similar things. Atmosphere in a Spielberg film is a character, and more than so many other directors. And with Carpenter, it's the same. I mean, but I prefer the way he does it. And we've mentioned his name on the podcast 700 times, and this film and his other films is many of those reasons why. And it's because he knows what he's doing, and to do it on a shoestring budget as well. It's just, he's a natural, and his long shots, wide angles, all supported by that soundtrack. It's just kind of unbelievable. And it's, like I said, that constant building dread for a film where not a great deal happens. There is genuinely a scene that before Annie dies, Michael's just stood outside for 10 minutes. He's like, One part he stood outside the kitchen, then he moves to the front, then he comes back, then he drops a plant pot. There's like nothing going on, but it's just shot so incredibly well. He makes those scenes in broad daylight just absolutely terrifying, which isn't always easy to achieve. And I think he's like a fan of just doing shots which, as cheesy as it sounds, could be like a creepy painting. So you'll have like the big wide landscape with like a little hint of a character or something like that. And he does that, with this movie. And I think it's always trying to keep you in that constant sense of dread. Even when they're watching the movie on the sofa or in the classroom, atmosphere is kind of created through these small little creeps in the camera, and the music in particular. It's just, it's so good. And there's no, like you mentioned the lighting, Si, you're completely right. There's some of it is kind of noir-y, and it's very just, look, here's what you need to see.
Yeah.
Michael is silhouetted like 7 times in this film. It's all very purposeful, but at the same time, quite straightforward because of the low budget. And it's just the way he's able to make those resources work, and the direction of Michael as well, and the music. Rumour has it he did the soundtrack in 4 days, which is just kind of like obscene.
Jesus,
so
cheat codes. The man has cheat codes. He can do this.
He is a master at atmosphere. There's no bones about it, and this is one of his strongest examples. This you talked about the theme. Completely agree. It's something that I would listen to, and there's been variations of it as well. It's so thumping. It's up there with The Exorcist. It's just up there with the greatest of all time. He's an atmosphere master, and you might want to pick apart some of the other stuff in the movie, but the acting and stuff like that, but no one's tearing apart the atmosphere. It's S tier stuff. It's so good.
Yeah, it's absolutely the highlight for me, which brings us nicely to the conclusions for this particular version of Halloween. How do we all feel about this film overall? I guess I'll go first, actually, since I sort of opened it up there. I felt like I was going to be way more critical about this than I have been, and it's one of those examples that we have many times where it's like, I talk about it with you guys and I'm like, do you know what? Yeah, there are things about this that you guys enjoyed that makes me appreciate it more. The atmosphere was great. I thoroughly enjoyed that, and I had a good time watching it. But when I finished it, I think I just kind of went, fair enough. It feels, obviously, by today's standards, very quaint, which is, you can't hold that against it. I'm sure, of course, we know it was massive for its time. There's no question about it. Does it have much to offer now? Yeah, probably, because I'm sure there are other great examples, but we talked a lot. we've crapped on the slasher film genre as it's gone. But obviously it's important to go back to where it started and kind of see how you can potentially rein things back in and still be effective. I'm glad that I watched it, just to know for sure. I appreciate that it's punchy. I don't think it's my genre. It hasn't really particularly interested me in seeing Friday the 13th or Nightmare or anything like that. But I enjoyed it. It's not my favourite John Carpenter. It's nowhere near the heights of The Thing for me. But yeah, I certainly wouldn't call it a bad film by any measure. Steve, how would you sum up your experience with Halloween 1978?
I mean, it's almost a hit Control C and then Control V. I fully was expecting this to be kind of dull, not my thing, not a slasher film fan. But I came away pleasantly surprised, and obviously you have to come at it from the lens of time. And I was just appreciating how, despite it being a cornerstone of what would be a burgeoning genre, how much of it kind of eschews, or if it does things, it gets done differently by other films, probably for their detriment. As a time watching it, I was pleasantly surprised. Much like Sido, I wouldn't rate it as my favourite Carpenter film. That's elsewhere, I'm afraid. Perhaps in Antarctica, a certain station, or is it Arctic? I can't remember. Either way, you know how that goes. Good time. And as a movie monster, a horror slasher killer villain, Michael Myers is establishing film pretty good. The stuff that comes after, not so much. Not so much maybe the film that we're going to talk about in a bit. That's a bit of a grey area. We'll get there. But yeah,
So
if you're going to watch, if you want to go to the Halloween films, don't just watch the first one.
Yeah.
At least of the original continuity.
Yes. KDB, final thoughts on the original Halloween?
So, like, you've both sort of touched on it. Like, a lot of this film is in danger of feeling really silly because, like, so much of the iconic stuff in it, like, has been redone or turned into a trope or memed or parodied. I think I sent like 2 Michael Myers gifs alone in the Discord in the last couple of days, and it's just like so much of it has kind of become almost kind of silly. So, and does that mean it's aged a bit? Possibly. I don't know if a young viewer today will get the same sense from this as I did when I watched it, because, and I'm watching it today with the context of 30 years ago in mind, and yeah, I'm thinking about it in a different way, and for me it does still affect me to this day. I love this movie, and I think we've been back and forth about it. For me, it is a supernatural movie with the sort of cover of a slasher, and its main character is the reason the franchise has persisted and what he represents and what he's capable of. For me, it's really fascinating to watch. Gives me the horror chills you want from a movie like this. It's also quite low on the violence, which I find interesting and prefer in comparison to the more modern take, and not just from this franchise, we've all said it, from other slasher movies and stuff. And I think it does enough horrible stuff without having to really see like a knife going through someone's face in super high res detail. I think the atmosphere it creates, the music, the cinematography, questions it floats around Mike are all timeless and powerful today. For me, it's one of the goats of the genre. This led John Carpenter to being able to make The Thing. It set a standard that people have copied, some better than others. Big shout out to It Follows and a film I watched recently called Talk to Me, which are both heavily Carpenter influenced. And I think many people try to emulate his work, and this movie is one of the many reasons why. I think he hasn't done much bad, and this for me, yeah, like I say, it's the granddaddy of the slasher genre, and there's more to it than people sometimes give it credit for, I think. And yeah, that's how I feel.
Cool. I wanted to leave, at least talking about this film, just on this note, that when this podcast drops for the public, obviously the Patreons are going to get it several weeks early, but when it comes out publicly, it will be the film's 45th anniversary.
Oh,
so to still hold value after 45 years,
powerful.
at least like lots of props there.
Yeah.
So let's jump forward 40 years to 2018 and Halloween. No, just called Halloween, the 2018 film. If I understand correctly, the film started off as Halloween 3D, then it took the name Halloween Returns, I believe, and as it found its crew, it took proper shape. Carpenter returned in some capacity to sign off on things because he wanted to bring Halloween back to its roots following the many sequels, and in particular the Rob Zombie reboot duology, which he didn't like. His general sort of feeling on things at the time were, instead of sitting here complaining about it, maybe I should actually see if I can help make a decent Halloween film, which is, a nice positive attitude to have, considering the guy is quite known for being a little bit crotchety and sarcastic. As such, the film is a direct follow-up to the movie that we just talked about, the original movie. It throws everything else out and just goes, right, in this timeline, it's just Halloween 1, and this is 40 years later, nothing else occurs within that period. Jamie Lee Curtis returns as Laurie for the 5th time in her career out of the so far 11 movies in the Halloween canon. At this point, it was directed by David Gordon Green, released in September and October of 2018 with a budget of $10 million against a return of $259 million. Oh. On Metacritic, it has a 79% rating with an audience score of 6.8 out of 10. As a story setup, very simple. I can pretty much do it in 2 lines. The film takes place 40 years after the original, as Myers escapes transfer yet again, and Laurie Strode is now estranged from her family and a bit of a crazy shut-in prepper lady. I think that's pretty much all the setup that you need, really. Kelsey, have you seen, you're the established Halloween fan. Did you see this when it came out?
I did. I went to the cinema with my friend Ryan, who introduced me to
Halloween.
There you go. So, yeah, that's a callback. And yeah, we watched it together and in the dark together, and we're very kind of nostalgic. And yeah, I remember, we'll talk loads about it, but I remember coming out of it maybe kind of agreeing with sort of those scores and stuff you listed off there. I mean, that I didn't realise it made that much money. That's insane, and kind of explains where the 2 sequels came from.
The 2 sequels, yeah.
What I will remember specifically, though, is once that theme music hit and I was in the cinema and the lights were down, I was just like, I was giddy, absolutely giddy, because I had never seen a Halloween movie in the cinema until this point. So yeah, it was a big moment, and yeah, lots to talk about.
Indeed. Okay, well, let's just scrap in and just jump straight into the story then. Steve, how do you feel about the setup for Halloween 2018?
As someone who lives with someone who is a true crime podcast listener and enthusiast, it's nice to see one of these idiot muckrakers cause trouble and actually gets karma for it. I love the setup, though. The idea of some nosy Parkers essentially agitating one of the worst possible things to agitate, and it leads to a disaster. I know it's 40 years to the day in the game lore. Yeah, the game film. No, that's a different thing. In the film lore, but I still blame the true crime guys. I think it's their fault. This entire event is their fault, and I love it for it because it's people are that stupid nowadays. I genuinely, as a setup, that's great. But the idea that Laurie is a traumatized prepper lady, I think, it's almost becoming a trope into itself, because we have Sarah Connor in the latest Terminator film, but I feel like it's done a lot better here. There are some better payoffs than just I'm grumpy old and know how to use a shotgun.
Right. Although, to be fair, I would say that it happens in Terminator 2 as well. It's a more direct comparison with the recent film. But I mean, when I watched this, I was just like, so she's Sarah Connored, to be fair.
But there's layers to it, though, isn't there? The interview and stuff as well before stuff kicks off, and you can tell that it's not just pure rage and preparedness. She's obviously been traumatized and damaged beyond that. It's ruined her family life, for example. She has reasonable acquaintances with her granddaughter, but her daughter is completely ruined, or at least implied to be completely ruined. That might or may not change. And we even have, quote-unquote, a Dr. Loomis-style character who, spoilers for later on when we talk about characters, those red flags were visible from orbit. I'm sorry. But generally speaking, yes, as a setup, I actually was... maybe it's because I was so impressed with Halloween 78 that I was straight in for, yes, this is believably stupid, let's go.
Believably stupid is such a good way to put the opening of this film.
Yes.
Like, I was also kind of like, yeah, that is probably accurate. Like, if this was genuine, that would happen. Some dumb podcasters would somehow score an interview and go and do something stupid like they did. I really like, just throughout the sort of first act of this film in general, the framing of Myers. He doesn't have his mask for a long time, and you see flashes of his face and stuff like that. You get to see that he's blind in one eye. I was like, nice continuity, good, we like it. And yeah, they did a really good job of like shooting around him and shooting him in interesting ways and giving him his presence and stuff, which obviously they have to do stuff like this because it's such a huge time jump. Like, a film has just changed in general, so it was always going to feel different, and this film absolutely feels different from the 1978 original in so many ways. But you know, a lot of it, I was very much engaged from the get-go. I was really interested in the story of traumatized Laurie. Yeah, I'll take this interview. Now where's my money and get out? And that kind of stuff. And the believable family fracturing of her daughter being taken away by Child Protective Services because she doesn't want her, you know, out and about and wants to teach her how to fire a shotgun and all this stuff. And I can absolutely see that. There are some pretty weird stretches of logic to me. Like, when he escapes, right, we're going to jump forward a little bit. When he does escape, somehow by movie logic comes across the podcasters again. They're in Haddonfield. I guess it's Halloween. They've gone to the gravestone of Judith, and he's also gone there. So he then goes, right, well, they had the mask, so I'm going to kill them to get my mask back. It's nice and convenient that it all, like, timing wise, it all works out for him to get his mask. But, you know, whatever, that's aside. Kelsey, how did you feel about the early goings on of Halloween 2018?
Si, we're not watching the opening. They pull the mask out and he twitches. He can sense that mask. It's like a radar pinging him. He knows exactly where to go, exactly where to find it.
GPS.
He definitely has. I love the opening of this film so much. I mean, it perfectly picks up where the first left off. There's a line really early: "Glass Hill is the pit of hell," the Doctor says, and I'm just like, this is just utterly ridiculous and superb. Bit of dialogue from the Doctor. I love the idea that Michael again draws a specific Doctor to him. You know, Loomis assigned himself to Michael, and now this new Doctor did the same. He says, "I lobbied for it," and it sets the scene. And Steve, like you said, it sets the scene that maybe Michael has some kind of power and we're going to see it play out and affect other people. Spoilers, it does affect the Doctor, so that was quite funny. This opening sequence I really, really love, and you know, it's a while before that theme hits, you know, when he's holding the mask up and stuff. I love how that comes through, and with the smashed pumpkin, even the graphics and stuff, it all feels like a Halloween film by fans for fans, as you would say, Si. And I think we'll talk more. I think it has an overall dynamic that is quite different to the original, but as a sequel, I think the story functions really well in where it picks up. It is very much a retread of the events, and there's, you know, many times where it just does stuff that the original thing does, kind of one for one, and it's this passing of the torch thing that we've seen countless franchises do in the last decade or so. But I, like you, really like that notion of, you know, okay, what does trauma do to us, and what kind of prison can it put us in? And these are things that the first film doesn't really have to lean on, so that's quite good, and I like that. And this film is in a weird place because although it ignores everything canonically that came after the original, it still kind of has the legacy of those other movies to lean on, which instantly adds weight to Michael and even to Laurie as well. So it has this kind of weird advantage, and you know, it's almost like we're seeing Michael come for Laurie for revenge after the last 12 movies rather than, oh no, just one movie. So it's really strange watching this film because with the first movie, it kind of, you know, I mentioned that idea of fate and stuff, and this movie does touch on it as well, and Michael's potentially coming for Laurie because that's her fate, and, you know, fate is written that way, and fate is fickle and all that. But yeah, like setup-wise and the podcasters and stuff, that's another thing that there's like 4 other movies that have done that recently. The podcasters are a thing, and I kind of like it. I mean, maybe it's dating it, but I like that it's like, don't be a podcaster because, you know, you're just going to cause a load of chaos to happen.
Yeah, guys.
So
unless you're Resident Evil 1A, guys, yeah?
There's I don't know. There's like, as I say, there's like a bunch of human stuff in this film with the trauma side of things, and this different dynamic is there. And I like these themes of paranoia and fear and trying to escape your past. And I mean, I think like my deep analysis of it kind of stops there. But this is definitely a movie of set pieces, which we'll talk about. It's darker, more violent. And yeah, it sometimes has that kind of what can we do with this death sort of thing, a bit like those Saw and Scream movies, but which is, more kind of style than substance for my liking. But the setup and you talked about Michael and the way he's framed and stuff. It's all really cool. It's really kind of well, smartly and kind of classy and nice. And then there's just some other stuff in the film that maybe I don't like as much, but. The first act,
don't worry, we'll get there.
First act solidly, and we'll talk about characters and everything. But I kind of go into this movie quite positive and enjoying it for the most part.
Yeah, there's a lot of things to jump on there. Certainly, like just everything about it, I found particularly engaging. I really like not just the way the characters were shot, but the location as well. It's really nice to see. I mean, it doesn't really make a lot of sense, other than again, it's just kind of convenient movie logic that Laurie still lives in Haddonfield, like she wouldn't move out of the place where she nearly died. Okay, but it's nice to see different parts of it. You get to see the sort of more wooded, like Resident Evil 7 almost, wooded area where she lives out in the middle of nowhere. It's like, that's really cool. It's growing that location out a bit for me. Again, with the only having context of the original film, possibly that's in other stuff, I'm sure it is, but for me, who's watching it in this timeline, literally I watched the film before this and I don't know any of the rest. I was like, okay, cool, this is more of the location, that's good. When it comes to by fans, for fans, yeah, absolutely, like, some of those early lines are really great. I loved the one where she's like, one of the podcasters is like, somebody said that, he's your brother or something like that. And she goes, no, that's just something somebody made.
Yeah.
Really funny stuff. That feels like that was possibly like something the Carpenter wanted to get in there potentially. But really, I'm sure that probably upset some Die Hard fans, but it felt good-natured to me at least. Yeah. But there was a lot of stuff in there where it's like legacy sequels can be a really tricky thing. And I make no bones about it. If you follow me on social media, if you're in our Discord server, my favorite film of all time is a legacy sequel, so I can't criticize too many of them too much, but this one does a lot of the I've seen this exact shot before, like the classroom bit. I was like, that's exactly, I love that. I really enjoyed that because it's just little bits, like it's not overbearing, and there's enough, as you said, there's enough new stuff going on, especially when it comes to the character element that we didn't get. It occupies the same space as the three girls that you get to know early on in the original Halloween, but it's a completely different thing because it's this family situation and it's these new bunch of kids, and the way the world is now and stuff like that. Also, shout out to cell phoning and some Jello. You need to do it in a horror film, don't you, to take away the ability to call for help. It was an inventive way to get rid of it for me. I'll take it. Right, let's get a little bit further into the film then, I suppose. Do what we did last time. When the murders begin, how do we feel about it? Steve, the action begins. How are you feeling about Halloween 2018?
Jesus. Like, I mean, the way the podcasters get murked is like, how many people die there? 4 people?
Yeah, I think so.
Michael means business, doesn't he? I was actually genuinely, like, somewhere between impressed and horrified at, like, well, we've lost a bit of the subtlety, dropping teeth into a stool. But also I appreciated the fact that while, yes, he is a murderous killer man, he's still getting in there, smashing people's heads against walls and stuff. It's more so than just like, Jason chopping people in half or anything too cartoonish. It's like, aside from maybe one Gears of War curb stomp in the film, like most of the violence is somewhere between grounded and realistically doable by another human to another human if they were angry enough, if they were strong enough. I especially appreciate that maybe it's more, it's one continuous shot, but the power-up montage of basically Michael going from hammer to small knife to bigger knife.
Yeah.
and the theme's playing the entire time. Like, if you're just in it for Michael Myers murders people, that, like, 2 or 3 minutes must be heaven for you, because it's just so tense and so thrilling. I was strangely invested, and it's amazing that, like Si said with the shots earlier, you can get nostalgia for a film you saw like a day before. That was surreal for me. No, genuinely, I was somewhere between more engaged but quizzically repulsed, I suppose, would be to nutshell 2 minutes of talking.
I would, I'm similar. I was engaged because, this film has at least the advantage of modern trappings. So it's, it's nice and bright and colourful in places. It's very, largely well shot. It's easy to get engaged with it because that's the way films are designed now. There's, they've got to be eye candy and stuff like that. So it was very easy to watch. However, when the killing started, I was kind of like, I'm not really sure this is what I want out of Michael Myers. You're absolutely right about the brutality of the violence and the up close and personal nature for sure. But yeah, when we get into the gas station or whatever it is, where he kills 4 people in quick succession, and you see a couple of them, you don't see the others. I kind of appreciate that you don't have to see all of them die. You just kind of see their bodies. But I was kind of like, oh, is this really Michael Myers? Because he's leaving a lot of evidence and getting in and out quick, just feeling like because he can. I feel like the Michael Myers in the original movie would have waited until another time to do this, where he didn't have to kill 4 people and potentially put himself in danger of being caught again, etc., etc. And the tooling up sequence, well, I take your point, absolutely. That is kind of where I fell off completely. Not that I didn't enjoy the rest of this film, but like my investment in it definitely died here. Because
would you say it feels like more of a different kind of slasher film from a different?
Definitely,
yes,
100%.
It makes it feels completely incongruous from what. And this is just from my understanding of Michael Myers, and that's why I wanted to say what I said before about him being methodical and wanting to protect his kill streak almost by picking his moment. But yeah, grabs a hammer, walks into a house. He doesn't know if there's anyone in there or not. Oh, there's someone there. Smash their head in. Oh, now I've got a knife. Keep on walking. Just straight in and out of the house in about like 20 seconds. Off he goes. She was in his way, essentially. And this is what I think, Kelsey, you said exactly that. It's like he's not just killing people that are just bumping into. Well, now he is. And then the rest of the film just becomes, you're here, so you die now, which is unfortunately not what I wanted out of Michael Myers. But there you go. He seems too reckless. Kelsey, you're saying yes. I take it you feel the same way. Did you feel the same way when you watched it the first time?
Yeah, I was shocked at how kind of off-put I was for a couple of reasons. One, and I've said this before, just as I get older, I'm just less interested in seeing violence and gore. I'm really going off it, to be honest. It doesn't mean it doesn't have a place. I think, you can watch a movie and if it picks its moments and does a bit of brutality, it can have a lasting effect and all this. But when it's just kind of, there is a lot of box ticking. There's a lot of, you've come to see Michael Myers. We're going to give you Michael Myers, the daddy of slasher. Look at what he's going to do. And it depends what you're looking for. It's not what I'm looking for. If you're going out for a Friday night, with your pals to watch a slasher movie, you're going to have the time of your life watching that stuff. Like the gas station scene we've mentioned, like really, all I kind of need in that film is like the shot of him dropping the teeth over the door. That was in the trailer, and it's annoying that it was in the trailer because it's an awesome shot and it's super creepy and it's horrible. That's kind of all I need. And then you see one of them get strangled, their feet, kind of go limp, a bit kind of like a callback to the dog in the first film as well. But seeing poor, what's his name, male podcast guy get his head smashed against the door like 9 times, it's a bit much. And then, it's like, there's 2 people in the gas station clerk. You just see their jaw ripped out and stuff. I'm not sure I really needed to see that. And then I'll talk more in a bit when we get to characters about the recklessness of some of those other kills that you mentioned, Si. But yeah, I don't know. Like some of the action in the film, and poor Oscar as well. He gets spiked on a fence. Is it Oscar, the kid? He gets spiked on the fence, and it's like I just felt like I was watching a slightly cheapened version of Halloween. And I don't want to come off like a snob because I'm not a movie snob. Like I love a bit of gore and violence, I really do, but I don't know. Like, it's just, it felt like rather than Michael killing because he has a reason to, because he needs to get something, there was a bit of nonsense going on, and then just visually wasn't really what I wanted. But yeah, there's other good stuff in here. Like this film is a weird one. I'm sort of really back and forth with it. It's definitely a film of two halves. I not a big fan of the brutality. I just think it could have been trimmed down a little bit because I am a fan of some of the other stuff around it, which maybe we'll get to. But yeah, it's sort of fine. It's the dynamic is different, as I said at the start. It's completely different to the first film with all the homages it pays. I think they're like, yeah, you can make your Halloween film, but you know, you've got to hype up Michael Myers. You've got to hype up, it's going to be brutal and stuff, which I think they did before the film. And I really like Danny McBride, and he was a driving force behind this film. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if it's the film that maybe he ended up wanting to do, but yeah, it's difficult to sort of look at some of the stuff and just go, it's just a bit stupid, and not say, it's a bit stupid, because some of it is. But I don't know. I like. It really depends in the mood that I'm in, but this is not really what I wanted when some of that action starts unfolding. And what else did you say? So I think like the logic side of things you mentioned, that I actually don't mind. Like him I don't mind that he kills the podcasters because it's to get his mask back. Like, but did we really need to see it the way it unfolded? I don't know. So I'm kind of rambling a little bit, but yeah,
I agree. Like logically, it makes sense, but the way that it's laid out when you see it, it just loses the subtlety of it. Which I know, like we're 40, years removed from the original, so we're not going to probably get that, because whether or not it's true, but that's what studios believe audiences want to see. Yeah. They want to see the brutal. It probably is true. People, want to see brutal killings and stuff if they go and see a slasher/horror movie. It almost feels like, and I could be putting cart before the horse, this sounds like a really good sentiment for the conclusion, but it feels like this, at this point in Halloween canon, and again, bearing in mind I've only seen 2 movies, it feels like Michael Myers is a victim of his own success, really.
Yeah.
Because, there's just too much, like, it needs to be this, it needs to be brutal, it needs to have killing is scary, let's show some gore. It's like, it's not what it was originally, but now that's just kind of what it is, because we've had all these other films that have aped it and increased the brutality of it and stuff like that, where it's like he needs to compete against all the way up to something like, I know Saw is not a slasher flick, that's stupid, but like, it all spirals outwards from various other horror films. So something like the gate thing, which is possibly the most gratuitous kill in the film, possibly. You actually get to see, and it's close to a Hostel kill or a Saw kill or something. Which is not my interest anyway. I'm not off-put by it necessarily. It didn't, give me the nightmares or anything. I was just like, that's not what I wanted out of the character. I was still engaged. Like
he's wearing the wrong mask then. Like it should be a hockey mask.
Exactly. Yeah, I was engaged by it, but I also wasn't at the same time. It's bizarre. It is bizarre. Let's dig more into the story then. Steve, any of the other things you like or didn't like about the way the rest of the story plays out?
Okay, the central conflict between Laurie and Michael obviously is what we're here for. I think they did that pretty well. Yeah. The payoff with Karen is a bit of an odd one. Like in a way, because she's right that Laurie has kind of completely messed her up and could have potentially ruined her life. But she then gives in to her mother's basic ideas and stuff, and it also leads to saving the day, which is a little bit of a messed up message. I didn't really appreciate the corruption of, not Loomis. I was actually more invested in Parker, I believe his name is, traumatized policeman who's also been through the events. Hawkins, right? As a burnt out cop who was there at the time of Haddonfield and is also traumatized, kind of as a parallel to Laurie, but also somewhere more on the side of trying to do it almost properly, except for saying he was going to shoot Myers' brains out and then get him murked. It was nice seeing like different generations of trauma trying to resolve it. The big payoff at the end I thought was pretty satisfying and in typical boogeyman fashion. Does he get away? Well, there's 2 sequels. What does that tell you? But it doesn't do it directly. I appreciate that. This is probably skipping way too far ahead. But there is like a sequence at the end of the film where there is no probable way for the man to have escaped. And yes, he disappears. And the only way you know for sure they definitely got out alive is, instead of post-credit like scene, we get post-credit audio of him breathing through the mask. I thought that was rather, in terms of sequel setups, I was like, okay, you know what, I'll let you have that one. That was kind of creepy and inventive. But the main payoff, seeing Laurie blow off Michael's hand with a shotgun, which sounds way more action-packed than it really should do, but it was just, there was something nice about seeing this supposedly indestructible killer man take some actual damage.
Yeah. To jump to the end of the film, absolutely, I really did. Just like the original film, I really did enjoy the house showdown. It was perhaps a little short, and outside of blowing the hand off, Laurie feels like she doesn't do a whole lot, but that is an awesome moment, and as is Michael just standing there while everything's on fire, just standing completely still, and he's just like, you don't know if he's thinking, okay, well that's that, then I'm screwed, or if he knows something we don't know, which, you know, as you've said at the end there, he does know, clearly, because he's okay, and he survives and moves on to the next 2 films. Also, a point, shouldn't shooting up through the floor kind of tell Michael Myers where they are? But whatever, I guess. I guess he's not that clever after all. You talked earlier, Steve, about Sartain and his villainous ideals / corruption. I don't hate the I want to watch the killer work in his element thing for the reason that he escapes. It's no less paper thin than some other stuff from this genre and horror in general. It's fine. It's perfectly serviceable. Didn't particularly upset me or anything like that. You need a reason to get him out there, so this works and it's different enough from the original, but also, as you said, it connects it to the original as well, because he's sort of like taken on the role from Loomis. He's a student of his, and the cops are related to it. So again, it's growing out Haddonfield a bit, which I really, really enjoyed. Kelsey, how do you feel about the rest of the film, I suppose?
Yeah, you've both kind of covered it. I just want to point out, I do really like the scenes with Laurie and the family, like in the restaurant and stuff. And when she goes, she goes to meet her granddaughter at the school and things, like, it, as I said, these are the sort of advantages the original film doesn't have, and I do really like that stuff in this film. And I think Jamie Lee Curtis is really good in those scenes, and I think everybody's kind of really good. And this is where I'm sort of at odds with this film, because I do think there's a lot of strong stuff in it, and I just think the film is at war with itself to tick those boxes for Michael Myers, when actually we could have had something a much, much smarter. And I'm not saying it's not a smart film, and I'd sort of save it for the conclusion, but it's just like, there's a lot of good stuff in, like, the little flashes of, you know, when it shows the little flashes of training when they're kids and like tooling up and testing traps and stuff in their house. Like, I love all that. That's really good. And I'm like, this is a great legacy sequel. And I just think it's sort of at war with itself with some of the action. The house showdown is great, but it's just like, some of it just goes a bit overboard, but it's, I think, mostly story-wise, it's a great ride. It's, as I said, it's a film of set pieces, and it's like, oh, which was your favourite death? And it's like, well, that's not really how I watched the film, but it's what they did, and it's the dynamic is strange, is, like I say, it's different to the first film, but it's fine by the end of it. Story-wise, and I mean, I've seen the sequel. I actually haven't seen Halloween Ends yet, because I'm kind of afraid to watch it because everyone says how terrible it is. But
oh dear.
Like you mentioned, like him standing in the fire and stuff. Like, yes, that's the stuff I like. It's like he sort of knows he's gonna get out, so he's not panicking, and he's sort of very composed. There's lots of interesting stuff, and I do think it is darker. Like we've mentioned the homages it does, and that, funny enough, that scene in the original where Loomis, you know, when Michael first takes the car with all the patients wandering around in the rain, and that's kind of paid homage to again in this film with the young kid and his dad, and when they kind of get offed. But that's like super dark. Like, it's rare to see kids die in films and stuff.
Yes,
but he kills the kid, and I was like, oh my god! And it's just there's. I just want to kind of point out this is a lot darker at times, and I think maybe to its own detriment, but I don't know.
theory time. Okay, sorry, I have to jump in.
Go
I
for
think
it.
maybe when he was originally a child murderer, he won't kill anyone younger than that.
Well, yeah, maybe.
Like,
Interesting.
and unfortunately, child who does get murdered is a little bit
Yeah.
older. I think it's sad and awful to the point where I think that's why they show scenes with him literally seeing a baby and walking away.
Yep.
And the same scene from the first film where he bumps into some kids and then just walks
Yeah.
past. But it's still it's something you don't expect to see because it's technically his like first on-screen kill, isn't it?
I
of
think
the film, him killing a
It
kid.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. Yeah.
Because his dad's been murdered off screen.
Yeah.
It's a hell of a statement forward. Yeah.
Yes, fair points all round. When it comes to the next topic, then is characters. So speaking of kids, MVP of this film is Julian,
Yeah.
who is the kid that's being babysat.
Yeah.
He was hilarious. I thoroughly enjoyed him. But that aside, I'm being genuine, by the way, he was great. That aside, the other characters, largely serviceable. Nobody I thought was terrible. I feel like there was, and it might be because it's been 2 weeks, but a lot of them were forgettable. I liked the family dynamic, certainly, but they weren't hugely fleshed out people. I actually felt like the podcast duo's deaths were particularly impactful. And it might be because they had we just established they didn't have the first on-screen deaths, but it was particularly brutal, I guess. And I think they had the most prominence in the flick to that point as well. But it did feel like I felt a little bit sad for them when they went. They didn't deserve that, maybe. But yeah, I've already said I really like what they did with Strode. I thought she was really cool. They allowed her, a bit like the first film, to be a badass, but also to show that she was traumatized and deeply messed up by what's happened. And then she gains her composure and does the thing that she's been preparing all of her life for. And I thought the granddaughter, again, it's kind of forgettable, but she was a decent sort of like patsy for the final girl sort of stereotype, if you like. Kelsey, how did you feel about the characters?
Well, let's pour one out for old Ray, Karen's husband, who, he was just trying to...
Oh, yeah, brutal.
He delivers a great line early in the film where he puts his little tool under the sink and he's like, "You touch my tool and I'll kill you and your whole family," or something like that. And then he goes out in the end and he gets taken out. Oh, poor Ray.
Strangled,
And
isn't
it's
he?
just like, and I think that's the last you see of him. He's kind of forgotten about. I think, again, there's a sort of slightly wider cast of characters than the original, but for me, I mean, starting with Laurie, we've kind of mentioned it. Laurie Prepper Strode, she's got the gate, the CCTV, bolts on the door, the spotlights on her roof. She's living a life I kind of want to live myself, to be honest. In the woods, away from
Off the grid.
Yeah, away from everyone. It seems quite nice. She, for me, she has a much more interesting role than the original movie. I mean, she's here to kind of show, how we let that trauma affect us and those around us. And she's been waiting for this fateful return of Michael and trying to prepare her family. And she knows that he was always coming back. She's tuned into this fate. And I think at the same time, it's kind of destroying her. She's probably going too far with how it affects her relationship with her family. She drinks too much as well. Her hair could probably do with a brush. She may end up being right that Michael is coming back, but I think, like other characters across the franchise, her exposure to Michael in the past is kind of maybe why she's not necessarily playing with a full deck, and I think that's what Michael does to people. And so this film is doing a lot of that for Laurie, and I think in the original where we were sort of positioned, you're kind of, as the viewer, almost positioned as Laurie. Here we are, more the observer and just kind of seeing, how it's playing out for her and saying, look, this is the route that it could go. Learn from her mistakes, and she gets her son-in-law killed. Her performance is awesome as well, Jamie, and she even does like little things which I do really appreciate. The playing with her hair, which she does in the original, she does here in in the sequel as well. So I really like that, and I think as someone who, I do really like Laurie in the original, I almost prefer this kind of version of her because, as I've said earlier, this film has kind of more to rest on and sort of more to give you for the character. So I really like her, but it is sort of all about Michael again. We get a more advancement kind of on what he is. And we've talked about the opening sequence, which I think in particular does a lot for it. He feels that mask when they pull it out the bag. He's twitching. The patients around him are acting weird. The dog's barking again. It's all there. There's something probably supernatural going on. And again, it's in that way where it's like, oh, it can be explained away. It's simple coincidence that the dog's barking and stuff. But I don't think that's what's happening. I think Michael is making this stuff happen. His energy is dark. And his motives, which you've sort of referenced, Si, they don't remain fully clear. And I think more often than not, he is killing for a reason. Like, he needs to gain something. He needs to build to his final form. He needs that boiler suit. He needs a car. He needs the mask, and he needs the knife. You mentioned he walks into the house and batters the lady with the hammer, but he then does swap the hammer for the knife. For me, I sort of let that one kind of pass because it kind of makes sense. And he has this manifestation of evil that he is kind of forming up to, that he needs to be before he can pursue Laurie again. Maybe he's been cursed or something. But then there are also some contradictions to it. Steve has said he's not going to kill a baby, for example, but why is that? And it's then right after that, he goes and stabs a woman through the neck in her home, but seemingly for no reason, because he doesn't gain anything from killing her. And I sort of looked at that scene and I'm just like, well, why is he doing this? Because this kind of throws the whole theory that he's killing for a reason out the window. And even if that reason is something as stupid as, I need to get a kitchen knife. So, yeah. Unless, I don't know, the baby was really annoying him and he had to take it out on somebody. But, who knows? Maybe it's chaos. And funnily enough, right after he stabs that woman through basically the face, it cuts to the school dance and the song playing is I Don't Care, which has some chaotic lyrics about driving your car off a bridge and all this kind of stuff and not caring. So I do kind of think Michael's motives in this film are maybe made misleading and mysterious on purpose. It's like he's playing a game with people. The opening shot of him in the courtyard is like he stood on a giant chessboard, with the design of the courtyard in the mental hospital. So yeah, I think this movie, I'm going on and on, but I think it does go out of its way to try and keep up the mystery. He is this manifestation of evil, and I am a fan of that depiction, and I think some of the other movies did stupid stuff with him, but I think this, it stands alongside the original for, there's something going on with him here that's a bit more than just a psychopath killer, and it does a few, I'd say unsubtle hints towards it, but I really like how Laurie and Michael are both depicted in this movie in a big way.
It's interesting what you say about Michael Myers. So I just did some quick maths in my head, and in the story of this film, he's 61 years old, I guess, because he's a 6-year-old child when he kills his sister. 15 years later is Halloween, so he's 21, and this is 40, so 61. So maybe, yes, like the I Don't Care thing is really interesting, and obviously, like you said, a great callback potentially to Don't Fear the Reaper and stuff like that. And maybe, it is kind of like that. It's like, I know he's got a mission. He's going to take out Laurie or whatever. Maybe that's his goal. It seems to be going that way. But he's 61 years old. This is pretty much his only chance. He knows he's either going to die or get caught. So it doesn't really matter so much. But it's just one of the many, many theories, I guess. Like the Michael Myers that I talked about, the stuff that I was interested in was the kind of ritualistic angle, which again bleeds into I must have this kitchen knife because I need to be who I was 40 years ago. I need to have overalls, I need to have the mask, I need to have the knife, which is cool. But it's then all the other stuff happens. You don't need to go over it again. I've already complained about it, obviously. Steve, how do you feel about the characters?
Generally speaking, the younger a character is, the less I tend to care about them. That's probably a little harsh, isn't it? But I was more invested in generally. The Strode family I was obviously fully invested in. The podcasters I was genuinely invested in because I knew they were going to get theirs eventually for basically poking the bear. But then any of the teenage drama, besides obviously Alison, the granddaughter, I really could not give two Jeffs about. It was just, I understand why it's there. Like the only teenage characters I was kind of moderately invested in was the almost like callback vignette of the babysitter murder where literally, I think it's Vicky and the young boy whose name I can't remember, and her boyfriend.
Yeah.
Like, you could have took that 10-minute segment, cut it out, and it could have just been like, here's a Halloween fan movie. Like, that would have been like that totally small microcosm. That was fine for me. Michael himself, this is probably, the words aren't accurate, but it feels like he's almost becoming more and more of a less man, more force of nature to me. Like, at this point, I can't see, like Kelsa said, and like yourself, Sai, have said, like, the reasoning behind some of it is spotty at best. But is it to cause terror? Is it to be cruel? Or is it something else? And then it's all building up to, like, you know, the cage match of the century, Hulk Hogan versus Randy Savage, or in this case, Michael Myers versus Laurie Strode. And that part, that's where it's full hooks in. To call back to Paul Ray, though, he did say he had jiu-jitsu and then he got his neck taken out by a grab. Was that like Myers being ironic, or I don't know? But yeah, the young teenage stuff. Like, can we have a slasher film where everyone's like 30 or 40 now, please? I'm sick of seeing. I want people talking about boring adult stuff like I do. I really don't need the teenage hormones. Oh, am I dating this guy tonight? Crap. That stuff was probably the least interesting or compelling stuff. Family dynamic stuff aside, that was fine, but that's like, you know, Laurie's PTSD bleeding over into others. You know, I was more invested in Hawkins, whose name I didn't remember until I was reminded their trauma, than I was, I fancy this girl, but she doesn't want to go out with me anymore, or any of that naff.
Yeah.
So, yeah, generally speaking, older characters are great, young characters suck. Bit ageist, but that's the way the film made it for me, so, oops.
Yes, Steve, just quickly on Hawkins, it's funny because you kind of look at the Doctor in this film as, that's the Loomis replacement, but really there's two Loomis replacements, because Hawkins is the other one, and he's the one that's like, you know, along with Laurie, he's the thread back to the original night, even though Hawkins isn't in the original movie, you know, they're placing him back there, you know, in the sequel to this, they expand on that a little bit more, but I think that character does really well at enhancing that message that Loomis was trying to get through in the original, as well as the Doctor, which is that this isn't your average serial killer. Like Laurie, he was there, he saw it firsthand. There's more to Michael than that, and he gives off that kind of sense and fear that even the sheriff, and I love the sheriff so much as well, the sheriff takes note, you know, trying to be brash, but he's like, hang on, maybe he's on to something here. And I think they only get one scene together, I think, Laurie and Hawkins, but that dynamic is awesome, where they kind of scare the shit out of each other and stuff, and they're wandering around like, Michael's here, yes, I know, and stuff like that. That's cool. I really like that stuff, and I think Hawkins as this kind of slight retcon is done really well, and I do really like him as a character.
Almost the sanest man in the room when Laurie says, I wished he got out so I could kill him. Like, are you crazy?
That's what I'm talking about. Laurie's, she's not necessarily all there, but yeah.
Okay, let's talk about the direction, the way the film looks, the way the film sounds as well. Steve, I'm going to chuck it to you again to start. How did you feel about how Halloween 2018 looked and sounded?
On par, generally speaking, with contemporary action horror films, I feel.
Agreed.
Like it's very, I don't want to use the word stock, but it feels very stock. Unless there's shots that are strangely nostalgic and trying to aspire to the original 78 original, they were all kind of washing over for me. There's a lot of backlit stuff, and as much as the tooling up sequence, I can understand why it's making people wince. I did appreciate that must have took a lot of effort to engineer. And I loved some of the visuals, like Myers' mask reflecting in the window and the backlighting there. But generally speaking, anything that's not a callback shot is just kind of okay, visually. And that's probably a little bit too harsh. I don't know.
I mean, my notes literally say it doesn't do much that you've never seen before. So, exactly that. It's a horror film of the era. It's fine. It's not bad. It just doesn't. Yeah, there is very little in there outside of stuff that makes you go, oh yeah, I know what that is. Like not just the fact that it happens, but also the way that it's shot, where Laurie gets thrown off the roof, and then you're like, she's going to disappear. She's going to disappear. She's going to disappear. Oh, there you go. You know. That bit's good, stuff like that. But yeah, it's callback stuff that pops you. But there isn't anything new in there that you go, that was really, really refreshing. Largely, it's just par for the course, I guess. Kelsey, any thoughts on the way the film looks?
Yeah, so this is...
And the atmosphere, I guess?
Yeah, this is a funny one because so it's like a lesson in trying to emulate Carpenter for the most part, but then on top of that, it just has that Hollywood modern day stuff kind of brushed on top, and some of the blood and guts as well. I mean, in a positive sense, I think the emulation it does is really well, and those callback shots and music cues, bits of dialogue and lighting, it does stand alongside the original, but you're kind of just then you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that's what Carpenter did, and it's not really doing anything new. But then, does it need to do that? It's a funny one. I mean, I do think it does a couple of things, and I mentioned the courtyard shot of the chessboard design of that. I think that is really strong, and you see Michael's elongated shadow. That's almost too good for what this movie ends up being. But it just, it has all this kind of same camera moves and colour palette and stuff of the original. I have no massive complaints there, but it's weird just watching a film try to emulate someone else so closely, which then in turn makes it feel a little bit hollow. So you can look at it from multiple ways. There's nothing wrong with kind of correctly pulling off something that makes it feel like it's in the universe. But then, as I say, at the same time, did it need to do that? Was there maybe a better option or a better route that it could have gone? But yeah, this is the Halloween film by fans for fans, so this is what it's done. And I think atmosphere-wise, it's not possible to match the dread that the original gives off. This one is way more punchy and thrilling and just kind of, modern. And that's because the aims of the movie are different, which I've talked about. The dynamics are different, and audience these days are different. We need some box ticking, and it's funny because it. And I may just sound utterly ridiculous, but it makes the original look like an art movie, and this is just a popcorn movie, just with the way they are. So
yeah,
they share a lot of the same atmosphere, but in the end, this one gives me a feeling that is quite different. I do need to give a huge shout out to the piece of music right after Oscar gets spiked on the fence, where you may have to go back and listen to it, but it smashes that kind of hard, dark synth pad like a really slow alarm. And the music, I believe, was done by Carpenter and his son. So that explains why that's so good. And I saw this movie in the cinema, and there's something about hearing the Halloween theme and seeing these Carpenter-like shots in the movie, it hasn't lost its touch. So you sort of have to give it points for nailing it, but then at the same time, I don't know. It's sort of like, is it slightly hollow as well? I'm kind of on the fence about it. It does tick some boxes for me, but it's not as good as the original, is my feeling, I suppose.
Just to confirm, music is credited to John and Cody Carpenter and Daniel Davies.
Yeah, both of his kids, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
Is that who the other
I think
is?
so. I'm sure I'm not imagining it. Even Daniel Davies, I'm sure he's related to Carpenter.
He's the godson of John Carpenter.
I knew, yeah.
But Cody, I believe, is his son. So, yes, and I'm going to sound, this is the most obvious, pretentious thing to say, but it's very clear that when it does try to be like the original film, that's what it's trying to do. It's just trying to ape it. It's just trying to do it, but it doesn't have the same intention. It's not doing it on purpose. It doesn't really even know what it's doing. It's just like, that's the thing we like, let's do that. I don't want to backtrack too hard, but one thing I didn't say about the original film that I really appreciated was, I talked a little bit about the long shots out in the streets and stuff, but the sort of dichotomy between that and then when we get inside and Michael's inside with another character, Laurie mostly, hunting her down, the claustrophobia of that, trapped in a small building, the way those two things are shot against each other, and Michael often in those cases always shot from sort of underneath as well to make him seem even bigger, like he's taking up even more room and there's no way around him. Just superbly well shot, both sides of that make each other side sing. Whereas this is just yep, there he is, he's scary for the most part. And the physicality of Myers is really good. The actor obviously did a really good job occupying that space. But, it feels a bit like a pale imitation, unfortunately. It is completely fine. As I said, it's not bad. Nothing really put me off. It's just it just doesn't have that spark. That being said, as we now roll into conclusions, I did enjoy watching it. I feel like we've sat here critiquing it, but I think partly because of the pace of it, it moves it along really well, and it's the same sort of length as the original film. When films these days have trouble not going overly long. I sound like such an old woman, but I just really appreciate it was over an hour and a half. I enjoyed that. It didn't eat up too much of my time. As much as we complained about the kills and not necessarily feeling like Michael Myers and Halloween, some of them were entertaining to watch. I'll give them that much. Like, they were well put together, even if they could have been any other movie as far as I could tell. It's not nearly as good as the original, very obviously. But I am faintly curious about the sequels, it must be said. Maybe I'm invested now. Maybe I want to know how he survives. Well, I'm sure they don't tell you how he survives the fire. He just did. That's how it works. But yeah, I'm interested enough to see. Is it Halloween Kills?
Yeah.
The next one.
And then Halloween Ends.
Maybe at some point. Yeah. It's not my favourite kind of genre or anything like that. But yeah, Trial by Fire. I overall enjoyed both films for different reasons to different amounts, and wouldn't necessarily know to seeing Halloween Kills, or even actually the original Halloween 2, to see where this whole brother and sister thing came from. Who knows? The franchise is now my oyster, I suppose. Kelsey, how did you feel about 2018 Halloween?
Yeah, I'm in a very, very similar boat to you, and it's hard for me to love this film because of how much I love the original. But this is a popcorn movie. It ticks those Carpenter boxes. I prefer when I'm watching. I earlier shouted out It Follows. I don't know if either of you've seen that, but it's one of the best horror movies of like the last 20 years, in my opinion. And it's like a John Carpenter film. But I'm watching it knowing it's not necessarily someone trying to emulate John Carpenter's Halloween. They're just taking the good stuff that he's done and sort of turning it into their own thing, which is why I enjoy a film like that more than this. This for more for me is more of just like, yeah, it's a fun, for want of a better phrase, Halloween movie.
Yeah.
As I've kind of hinted at, it has kind of different aims than the original. I think it's trying to do a couple of things, as I've said, which are often at odds with each other. It's trying to give that classy Halloween sequel which washes away some of the nonsense that's been done in the last 30 years by paying really good respect to the original characters and delivering an experience that fans of the original will get a lot out of, which it does. But then it's also ticking those slasher movie boxes like imaginative kills, which is a thing you see in reviews and stuff for all these kind of movies. The kills are really imaginative, the violence is really real and stuff like that. And it's just that brutal imagery, which, it can be fun when it makes you squirm and stuff like that, but it can very rarely add anything to the film beyond that roller coaster type thrill when it's just done lots of times in a movie. And then for me, when detailed violence appears in movies where it's, sort of not happening every 15 or 20 minutes, it can be much more worthwhile and have a bigger effect. But when you're seeing it like you are here, where it's loads in one movie, it just sort of, it devalues it, but not to the point where I sort of detest it or hate it. I'm still getting enjoyment from the movie. Like you said, like, despite that being said, I enjoy it. And so it becomes closer to something like, just as I've said, like a popcorn film, whereas the original is more classier and subtle for me. But yeah, so I do enjoy it. I think I came away from the cinema at the time thinking, well, yeah, that was fun and it was really cool to see the characters. But honestly, I don't think I needed 2 more films out of it. And I haven't seen Halloween Ends yet, but I would have been quite happy with this being it. And it gets points for atmosphere, points for the atmosphere and homages and the performances. But yeah, just some of it's a little bit cheap. And yeah, so the way I sort of look at this is I'm not going to be desperate to show this one to my kid when he's old enough, but I absolutely want to show him the original when he's old enough. So it's fine. It's good fun. It's very different to the original, but yeah, pays well enough respect. I don't think I've seen this 3 times now. I watched it at the cinema, I watched it with my wife at home, and I watched it for this podcast. I don't think I'll ever watch it again, but I'm definitely going to watch the original many times more in my life.
Steve, final thoughts on the 2018 Halloween film?
I mean, in this day and age where we have like reboot quills and various things of the like, I actually feel like this is kind of one of the strongest in terms of paying that lip service and acknowledgement to the original and taking what worked. You know, obviously they do some things with it that may or may not be more genre adjacent to the present day. But I actually came away with it kind of satisfied. I knowing that it's got 2 sequels kind of kills it a little for me. But as a direct sequel to Halloween, I thought it was pretty good. Like, you know, they've had it rough with the Rob Zombie Halloween stuff, Resurrection, and the original continuity. Like, easily the best sequel Halloween has ever had, which is apparently a pretty hard bar to, like, not break. But, yeah, like, as someone who doesn't like slasher films, this was already a hard sell to begin with. So the fact that I came away feeling moderately satisfied and thinking, you know what, that was okay. But why is there more of them? That's it. Michael Myers, in and of themselves, I think is at their most unnerving and violent for sure. Definitely feels more like a disaster in a mask, a walking disaster, not a actual like, oh, look at them, stay to them. It's strange. I feel like what I would think of as my ideal slasher film is probably closer to this than the original Halloween, but I'll reconcile that the original Halloween is easily the better film. Does that, which is just the most Fence City statement I could probably have made.
Do you know what? I think I agree that
it makes perfect sense. Like it's
good popcorn fluff.
This is the slasher film. The original isn't really a slasher film for me, but this is definitely a slasher film.
Fair.
All that being said, though, Jamie Lee Curtis is like pretty much like note for note one of the best film protagonists for this kind of thing ever. In both films, she carries it, and she's very, very good at what she does. Plus, she cosplayed Chun-Li that one time, so she's awesome anyway.
Jamie Lee Curtis, low-key goated.
Yes.
Nothing else remains for me but to thank our contributors and our Patreons once again. Support the show for as little as $1 a month to help us create more bonus content like this one over at patreon.com/FASprayPod. You can also join the Discord server to get in touch with members of the team and our community, discuss Resident Evil with us and other fans, and listen to the podcast live as it's recorded. You can find a link to the server, as well as our Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, etc. at faspraypod.com. And you can find the podcast on YouTube, Stitcher, Spotify, and iTunes. And if you enjoyed the show, please do leave us a review where you can. It helps spread the word. Thank you to the panel. You can follow all of the Pueblo people individually. I'm at Cyniac_123. Steve is at FB Steve Was Taken. Kelsey is at K_D_B_. And finally, thank you for listening and have a good week. Have a spooky week, in fact. Yeah, Jack-O-Lantern, that's the name of the show. Anybody got any? That made the most sense to me. I don't know if anybody's got anything better.
Nonsensical, like, sitting up resurrection.
Yeah. Surviving for some reason podcast. Yeah.
Reasons.
Okay, let me get the pad out.
Survive despite mortal wounds.
Hold on.
Absolute
I'm just going to close my
Can't we just say
window
Shatner Mask?
as I've just about to start.
Mask.
Some loads of kids
Painted
have appeared outside
Shatner Mask.
playing football.
What's happening inside?
I just got to get up and close my window because loads of children have appeared right outside playing football. So just give me a sec.
Okay.
Well, put on your painted Shatner Mask and show them what for, Kels. Yeah.